The two most likely replacements to succeed Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker have now confirmed that they're officially campaigning and running for the position. The first is jacketless Jim Jordan. His resume includes, among other things, partisan exploits, of which you are likely well aware. Chairmanship of the so-called weaponization of the federal government subcommittee, a humiliating attempt to exact revenge on Democratic law enforcement officials and others. The second is House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, whose most palatable attribute right now is maybe just that he's not Jim Jordan. But ideologically, how different are they? Look at their records. Donald Trump's first impeachment, withholding aid to Ukraine. Scalise and Jordan voted against impeachment. They also voted against certifying the election on January 6, hours after the attack, and without any questions about the integrity of their own re-elections. And then they both voted to let Trump off the hook in his second impeachment. What about legislation? They both voted against that historic bipartisan gun safety bill, the Safer Communities Act, same with the infrastructure bill, and the CHIPS and Science Act designed to keep economic pace with China. So just because Steve Scalise can find his jacket doesn't mean the two candidates are materially different on anything else. Joining our conversation, former Congressman from Florida, MSNBC political analyst David Jolly. With me at the table, Basil Smikle, a Democratic strategist and the director of the public policy program at Hunter College. David Jolly, your thoughts on these two?
Yeah, Nicole, we're about where we expected we would be in the days after Kevin McCarthy, which are Scalise and Jordan are really the two strong front runners for the speakership, but they still face that threshold that there's a question whether anybody can meet the 218 votes to become Speaker of the House. And so, look, a little bit of palace intrigue here on these two. Scalise has been McCarthy's number two now for about 10 years. He's been one place in leadership right behind McCarthy. But they began to separate, and McCarthy had some suspicions of disloyalty by Scalise a year or so ago. There was a question whether Scalise would challenge McCarthy in January to become Speaker. Alternatively, Jim Jordan, who for the last 10 years led the House Freedom Caucus, or at least was the titular leader of that caucus, he made a strategic decision in January not to lead his forces to oppose McCarthy, but to fold in under McCarthy. And McCarthy gave him the chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee, said, go impeach Joe Biden. And Jim Jordan, despite his decade of being a Freedom Caucus guy, has really fallen in line behind McCarthy's leadership, which puts a little bit of momentum now behind Jim Jordan. So clearly the two frontrunners, but still the question, can you hold the entire caucus together? They will be able to reach that decision behind closed doors before we see all the dirty laundry on the floor like we saw in January. But still a hard question if either one of them can reach 218.
All right. Should we do this or not? There is another person being talked about in the MAGA world. Should we talk about it? His name is Donald Trump. This is reporting from my colleagues. Former President Trump is considering a visit to the U.S. Capitol early next week as House Republicans consider who should be their next speaker, according to two GOP lawmakers and two Trump allies. Former president, who has not set foot on Capitol grounds since prior to January 6th, is considering making an appearance. So he goes on Fox News this afternoon and says this, quote, they have asked me if I want it. Not clear who the they are. There are voices in his head who sometimes chime in as well, as we all know. But Basil, do we entertain this? Do we give it oxygen? Do we ignore it in the next surprise if it happens? What do we do with this?
Well, I think you can't ignore it, because the reality is every GOP candidate on that debate stage, even if they claim to be running against Donald Trump's policies, they still, serve fealty to him. So he's going to be a player in all of this. And of course, I hate to say that, but the reality is I have to account for it, I should say. Mm-hmm. And what you won't see is what we saw in 1994 with Newt Gingrich standing with members of Congress and saying, this is the contract with America and all the intellectual underpinnings from the Heritage Foundation. I don't mean to sound wistful about that time in the Republican Party, right. But it does reinforce this juxtaposition where you had Representative Comer on Tuesday saying, we have no plan. Representative Davidson saying there's no path forward to governing. So to me, what you're looking at with either Scalise, Jordan, Scalise, Jordan, and Donald Trump's influence is that you're looking at who's going to more quickly decimate what's left of the Republican Party. And create something that is so antithetical to where the rest of this country is. That, I hate to use the term lesser of two evils because I just generally hate saying that, but in my strategist hat is, well, who's the one that's going to unite Republicans the most and raise the most money for the more vulnerable members? That probably is going to be part of the test, but the reality is it doesn't matter anyway because it's all bad and it's all the worst possible outcome.
David Jolly, what are you hearing about the pacing of any of this? Do you think they have a new speaker in the near term?
I'm not sure by next week. First of all, I don't think Donald Trump actually accepts the overtures once he finds out that the speaker can't pardon somebody. Once he realizes you got to be president to have the pardon power, he's probably not interested. But I do think he has the power to knock out one of the top two candidates, and that might be Steve Scalise that he knocks out if he tilts, the lever in favor of Jim Jordan. Here's the interesting thing on timing, Nicole, and this is where it's a little different than what we saw in January. In January, it was an organizing session brought about by the Constitution and House rules, and so they had to go to the floor for a vote, and we got to watch it all play out. Now, behind closed doors in this environment, traditionally the House Republican caucus has said, whichever candidate can get 51% of the caucus, we all go to the floor and give that candidate our votes. That began to unravel in 2015 when McCarthy, frankly, I was part of this, there were people who withheld their votes from McCarthy to succeed Boehner. Even though he got 80%, 90% in caucus, there were enough of us that said, we're not taking our votes to the floor. So that rule is off. It's done. It no longer exists, which means what we will see with the Republican caucus, I believe, is meeting after meeting after meeting behind closed doors to get to 218 so that they know when they go to the floor, there's just one vote for speaker. How long does that take? Well, now the pressure becomes the 45-day CR, because part of the negotiation for who the next speaker is within the Republican caucus is what is the strategy for the next budget negotiation. And ironically, the next speaker is going to lose the budget negotiation to Schumer and Biden. I mean, math is just math. So how do you responsibly explain to your caucus what you're going to work towards, but you'll probably lose and still secure the votes for speaker? Who knows? This is where Donald Trump comes in. If Donald Trump puts his finger on the lever of somebody, it could catapult him to the top. If Donald Trump stands for election as speaker, I don't think he gets 218. You still got two people in there that voted to impeach him.